The Gestapo called him the Ghost of Vienna, an assassin who could dismantle a man's life as meticulously as the timepieces he now repaired. For 20 years, that ghost had slept. But surrounded by the laughter of his tormentors, the old watchmaker began to wake up. The autumn of 1943 had painted Warsaw in shades of gray and brown, colors that matched the weary souls trudging through streets under the weight of occupation. In a narrow alley off Marszałkowska Street, where the morning sun barely touched the cobblestones, stood a shop so small it seemed forgotten by time itself. Above the door, faded letters spelled Jakub Nowak, Clockmaster, in Polish, and below it, the newer German sign, Uhrmacher Reparaturen. Inside, surrounded by the gentle symphony of ticking clocks, Jakub Nowak bent over his workbench with the concentrated devotion of a monk at prayer. His 70-year-old hands, spotted with age and trembling slightly from arthritis, held a tiny gear with surprising steadiness as he positioned it within the delicate mechanism of a pocket watch. Each movement was precise, calculated, the result of decades spent understanding how small pieces work together to create something greater than their sum. The bell above his door chimed softly as his granddaughter Eliza entered, her 16-year-old face bright with the kind of defiance that made Jakub's heart ache with both pride and fear. Her dark hair was braided in the style the Germans preferred for acceptable Polish girls, but her eyes held the fire of her grandmother, the woman who had taught Jakub that some things were worth any risk. "Uncle," she whispered, using the Polish word for grandfather as she kissed his weathered cheek. "How is your work today?" Jakub's eyes crinkled with genuine warmth as he set down his tools. "The same as always, little bird. I fix what is broken and hope it keeps good time." His voice carried the faint rasp of age, but underneath lay something harder, like steel wrapped in velvet. Behind Eliza, barely visible in the shadows near the back of the shop, another face appeared, pale, frightened, but determined. Sarah was only 15, but the yellow star she had once been forced to wear had been hidden away months ago when Eliza had made a decision that could cost them all their lives. The Jewish girl lived now in a space behind a false wall that Jakub had constructed with the same precision he brought to his timepieces. "Is it safe today?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the ticking chorus. Jakub glanced toward the street, where German patrols moved with the casual arrogance of conquerors. A gallows had been erected in the main square just last week, a permanent reminder of what happened to those who defied the Reich. The wall of the missing grew longer each day, names of the executed and disappeared scrawled in desperate handwriting by families who would never see their loved ones again. "It is as safe as any day," he replied gently. "But remember, little sparrow, stay quiet, stay hidden. The wolves are always hunting." The old man returned to his work, but his mind was elsewhere, calculating risks with the methodical precision that had once made him the most feared spy master in Central Europe. Before the Great War, when he was young and the Austro-Hungarian Empire still cast its shadow across half of Europe, he had been known by a different name. The Jesuit, they had called him, not for any religious devotion, but for the way he could blend into any environment, speak any language, become anyone he needed to be. He had orchestrated the deaths of anarchists, revolutionaries, and enemy agents with the same careful attention to detail he now applied to repairing watches. But that was another life, another war. This war, he had sworn, would find him as nothing more than a harmless old man who fixed broken things. The morning passed in comfortable routine. Customers came and went, mostly German soldiers and officials who needed their timepieces maintained. Jakub served them with the proper deference, speaking broken German with the thick accent of an uneducated Pole. They saw what they expected to see, a relic of a conquered people, useful only for his craft, too old and frail to pose any threat. None of them noticed the way his eyes cataloged their faces, their ranks, their routines. None of them suspected that behind his trembling hands and stooped posture lay a mind that could still map the vulnerabilities of an entire command structure. At precisely 11 o'clock, as he did every Tuesday, Jakub hung the closed-for-lunch sign in his window and made his way to Café Centralna. It was a modest establishment, the kind that served ersatz coffee and stale pastries to customers who pretended not to notice how much the quality had declined since the occupation began. But it served another purpose for Jakub. It was here that he occasionally caught whispers of information, fragments of conversation that helped him understand the mood and movements of their occupiers. He took his usual table near the back corner, where the shadows were deep and the acoustics carried voices from nearby tables. The waiter, a nervous man named Tomasz, who had learned to see nothing and hear less, brought him his weekly indulgence. A cup of coffee that tasted more like burnt grain than the real thing, but still carried enough warmth to ease the ache in his old bones. Jakob had just settled into his chair when they arrived. The conversation in the cafe didn't exactly stop, but it shifted. Voices became more careful. Eyes found sudden interest in newspapers or the bottom of coffee cups. 3 German officers entered with the casual confidence of men who owned everything they surveyed. Their uniforms were impeccable, their boots polished to mirror brightness. Their presence a reminder that Warsaw belonged to them now. The leader was young, perhaps 30, with the kind of aristocratic features that spoke of breeding and privilege. His SS collar tabs identified him as Sturmbannführer Klaus von Harden, and everything about him radiated the dangerous combination of intelligence and cruelty that made the most effective instruments of the Reich. His pale blue eyes swept the room with predatory interest before settling on a table just 2 meters from where Jakob sat. The old watchmaker didn't look up from his newspaper. He simply sat there, a picture of elderly frailty, his hands trembling slightly as he turned the pages. To any observer, he appeared to be just another broken Pole, perhaps hard of hearing, certainly of no consequence to the important men who had chosen to grace this humble establishment with their presence. Von Harden settled into his chair with theatrical flourish, his 2 subordinates flanking him like hunting hounds awaiting orders. One was a thick-necked brute with scarred knuckles and dead eyes, the kind of man who enjoyed his work too much. The other was younger, nervous, trying to prove himself worthy of his superior's attention. Mein Gott, Von Harden said in German, his voice carrying easily across the small space. Look at this place. Like stepping back in time, isn't it? All these pathetic relics pretending their world still exists. His companions laughed on cue, the sound sharp and ugly in the cafe's subdued atmosphere. Jakob continued reading his newspaper, but every word was being cataloged, analyzed, filed away in the vast archive of his memory. Speaking of relics, the thick-necked officer said, nodding toward Jakob, look at that one. Christ, he must be ancient. Probably remembers when Poland was actually a country. Von Harden's gaze fell on the old watchmaker with the casual cruelty of a cat studying a wounded bird. Pathetic, isn't he? Look at those hands shaking. Probably can't even hold a spoon properly anymore. These are the people who once thought they could resist the Reich. Jakob turned a page of his newspaper with deliberate care, his face showing nothing but the vacant concentration of an old man struggling with small print. Inside, however, something ancient and deadly was beginning to stir. I wonder what stories he could tell, the younger officer said, trying to contribute to the conversation. Probably fought in the last war, maybe even killed a few Germans. Look how frail he is now. Couldn't hurt a fly if he tried. That's the beauty of it, Von Harden replied, his voice taking on the tone of a professor lecturing particularly slow students. Time does what bullets cannot, reduces the proud to shadows, the strong to trembling weaknesses. That old fool sitting there represents everything Poland was and will never be again. Yesterday's man, yesterday's people, yesterday's world. The conversation might have continued in this vein, might have remained nothing more than the casual cruelty of occupiers entertaining themselves at the expense of the conquered. But then Von Harden said something that changed everything. Speaking of cleaning house, he continued, lowering his voice slightly, but not enough to escape Jakob's carefully trained ears. Tomorrow night we'll be conducting a special operation in the Praga district. Building by building sweep, starting with Konopaka Street. Intelligence suggests several Jewish rats have been hiding in that area, and some of the locals have been helping them. Jakob's hands stilled on his newspaper for just an instant, so briefly that no one noticed except perhaps himself. Konopaka Street, his building. How many men? The thick-necked officer asked. A full company would be overkill for these sheep, Von Harden replied with casual arrogance. I'll take 12 good men, more than enough to handle whatever resistance we might encounter. We go in at midnight when they're all cowering in their beds. Quick, efficient, thorough. By dawn, the problem will be permanently solved. And if we find evidence of collaboration, Von Harden's smile was winter cold. Then we make examples, public ones. Sometimes fear is more effective than bullets. Jakob finished his coffee with the unhurried movements of an old man savoring what might be his last taste of normal life. He folded his newspaper precisely, left exact change on the table, and rose from his chair with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints protested every movement. As he shuffled toward the door, he passed directly by von Harden's table. The SS officer didn't even glance in his direction. Why would he? The old Pole was invisible, irrelevant, no more worth noticing than the worn floorboards or faded wallpaper. But if von Harden had looked more carefully, if he had possessed the trained eye of a true predator rather than just the swagger of a bureaucrat in uniform, he might have noticed that the trembling in the old man's hands had stopped entirely. He might have seen that the stooped posture was just a little too perfect, the shuffling gait just a little too rehearsed. Most importantly, he might have recognized the look in Jakob's eyes, the cold, calculating gaze of a hunter who had just identified his prey. Outside, the afternoon sun seemed brighter, the autumn air cleaner. Jakob walked slowly back to his shop, appearing to all the world like an old man taking his time to avoid stumbling on the uneven cobblestones. But his mind was racing with calculations, possibilities, the intricate clockwork of a plan that was already beginning to form. 24 hours. It wasn't much time, but then again, he had orchestrated more complex operations with less warning. The question wasn't whether he could stop von Harden. The question was whether he could do it without sacrificing the life he had so carefully built. As he reached his shop, Jakob paused to look at the faded sign above his door. Jakob Novak, Zegermeisters, watchmaker, a man who fixed broken things, who understood the delicate relationship between precision and time. Tomorrow night he would fix something that had been broken for far too long. The ghost of Vienna was waking up. That evening, as the last customer left his shop and Jakob turned the key in the lock, he moved with purpose that belied his 70 years. The trembling in his hands had vanished entirely, replaced by the steady precision that had once made him legendary in the shadowy world of espionage. Eliza noticed the change immediately. "Uncle," she said softly, "you seem different tonight." Jakob looked at his granddaughter, really looked at her, memorizing the line of her jaw, the stubborn set of her shoulders, the fierce intelligence that blazed in her dark eyes. Tomorrow, if his plan failed, he might never see her again. If it succeeded, she might learn things about him that would change how she saw him forever. "Sometimes, little bird," he said quietly, "old men must remember how to fly." He moved to the back of the shop, where an ancient grandfather clock stood against the wall. To casual observation, it was simply another timepiece in need of repair. Its hands frozen at 3:17, its pendulum still. But Jakob's fingers found a hidden mechanism behind the clock face, and the entire unit swung silently inward, revealing a small space that had been concealed for 20 years. Inside were the tools of his former trade, a compact radio transmitter, coded message forms, several passports bearing different names and faces, and a collection of weapons that looked innocuous until you understood their true purpose. The walking stick contained a sword blade. The fountain pen held enough poison to kill a dozen men. And wrapped in oiled cloth was the knife, 8 inches of Damascus steel, perfectly balanced, its handle worn smooth by years of use. "What is all this?" Eliza whispered, her voice filled with wonder and fear. "My past," Jakob replied simply, "the part of me I hoped you would never need to see." He began to work, his movements economical and practiced. First the radio. 3 clicks, pause, 2 clicks, pause, 1 click. An old code, but one that would still be recognized by those who remembered. Within minutes, responses began to come. Acknowledgments from sleepers who had waited 20 years for this moment. The baker on Senatorska Street, who still listened to conversations over his counter and cataloged the faces of regular customers. The sewer worker who knew every tunnel and passage beneath the city. The police constable who had learned to see everything and report only what the Germans wanted to hear. One by one, they confirmed their readiness. "Sarah," Jakob called softly to the hidden girl, "come out. We need to talk." The false wall slid aside, and Sarah emerged blinking into the lamplight. Her face was pale but determined. She had survived this long by being brave when bravery was required. "Tomorrow night," Jakob said, looking at both girls, "there will be danger, more than we have faced before. I can stop it, but you must trust me completely. Can you do that?" Both girls nodded without hesitation. "Good. Sarah, you will hide in the deep space, the one behind the grandfather clock. It is smaller but completely concealed. Eliza, you will help her, then go to stay with Mrs. Kowalski on the 3rd floor. Tell her your grandfather has gone to visit his cousin in Krakow. Stay there until I return. But uncle, Eliza began. No arguments. His voice carried a new authority, the command tone of a man who had led dangerous operations in dangerous times. This is not a discussion. This is survival. As the girls prepared for what might be their last night together, Jakob continued his work. He studied the layout of his building, noting every entrance, every stairwell, every room where a man might hide or a trap might be set. He reviewed the intelligence his network had provided about von Harden's unit, their weapons, their tactics, their probable approach routes. Most importantly, he began to prepare the battlefield. The building at 47 Konopaka Street was 4 stories tall, built in the solid style of the late 19th century. It housed 12 families, most of whom had learned to ask no questions and see nothing unusual. But Jakob knew every resident, every habit, every secret. More than that, he knew the building's hidden geography, the servants' passages that connected apartments, the forgotten basement chambers, the roof access that few remembered existed. By midnight, when von Harden would come hunting, that building would be transformed into something far more dangerous than the SS officer could imagine. Working through the night with the methodical precision of a master craftsman, Jakob began to set his trap. A message to the sewer worker resulted in a maintenance problem that would flood the basement, forcing any assault team to use the main stairwell. A word to the police constable ensured that the building's electrical system would suffer a random failure at exactly the right moment, plunging the interior into darkness. The baker provided detailed intelligence on German patrol patterns, confirming that von Harden's confidence in using only a small force was justified and exploitable. Each element of the plan was a gear in an intricate mechanism, designed to work together with clockwork precision, and at the center of it all was Jakob himself, the old watchmaker who had once been the ghost of Vienna, preparing to hunt again. As dawn approached and the girls settled into their hiding places, Jakob made his final preparations. He dressed carefully in his oldest clothes, ensuring that every detail of his appearance reinforced the image of a harmless elderly man. The knife was concealed in a specially designed sheath sewn into his coat, invisible to casual inspection, but accessible in less than a second. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw what others would see: a frail old Pole bent by age and defeat, trembling hands and vacant eyes. The performance was perfect because it had to be. But behind those vacant eyes, the ghost was fully awake now, cataloging targets, calculating distances, preparing for the dance of death that would begin when the sun set again. Von Harden had made 2 critical mistakes. First, he had underestimated his enemy. Second, he had threatened the only things Jakob still loved in this world. Tonight, the SS officer would learn the cost of both errors. The clock in Jakob's shop chimed 11 as he completed his final preparations. Outside, Warsaw had settled into the uneasy quiet of occupation, a silence punctuated by the distant rumble of German vehicles and the occasional bark of orders from patrol units. Most citizens had learned to be invisible after dark, to draw no attention, to give the occupiers no excuse for the casual violence that marked their rule. But tonight, invisibility would serve a different purpose. Jakob moved through his building with the fluid grace of a man who knew every creaking board, every loose step, every shadow that could conceal a human form. The flooding in the basement had proceeded exactly as planned. A burst pipe that would take days to properly repair, according to the apologetic sewer worker who had reported the problem to the German authorities. The main stairwell was now the only practical route to the upper floors. On the second floor, Mrs. Kowalski waited with Eliza, both women tense but trusting. The old woman had survived one war already. She understood that sometimes good people had to do terrible things to protect what mattered. "He will come back," she whispered to Eliza, though whether she was offering comfort or stating a prayer was unclear. 3 floors below, hidden in the space behind the grandfather clock, Sarah remained perfectly still. The compartment was cramped and airless, but she had learned to endure worse. Her survival depended on absolute silence, absolute faith that the old watchmaker could do what he promised. At exactly 11:47 p.m., Jakob's contact in the police constabulary sent the agreed signal, a brief flash of light from a window across the street. Von Harden's unit was approaching, moving with the confidence of predators who believed they were hunting sheep. Jakob positioned himself in the building's entry hall, seated on the narrow bench beside the mailboxes. To any observer, he appeared to be exactly what he was supposed to be. An old man unable to sleep, perhaps worried about the sounds of boots in the street, the kind of nervous resident who might wait by the door to see if the Germans were coming for his building tonight. The performance was so convincing that he almost believed it himself. At 11:58, the first German soldier appeared at the building's entrance, a young corporal who checked the street number against a piece of paper before nodding to his companions. Von Harden materialized from the shadows like a pale specter, his uniform immaculate despite the night's work, his eyes bright with anticipation. 12 men, Jakob counted silently as they approached. Just as he promised, the SS officer spotted him immediately, an old Pole sitting in the entry hall, trembling with what appeared to be fear. Von Harden's smile was sharp as broken glass. "You?" he snapped in accented Polish. "What are you doing here?" Jakob rose slowly, painfully, his hands visibly shaking. I heard noises, sir. I was frightened. Sometimes there are thieves." "Thieves." Von Harden's laugh was winter cold. "Yes, old man, there are thieves. Jewish thieves hiding like rats in buildings like this. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "No, sir, I know nothing. I am just a watchmaker. I fix clocks, nothing more." The German studied him for a long moment, those pale eyes searching for any sign of deception. But he saw only what he expected to see, a terrified old man, pathetic and harmless. "Stay here," Von Harden commanded. "Do not move, do not speak, do not think. If you are lucky, you will live to see morning." Jakob nodded with appropriate terror, sinking back onto the bench as the assault team moved past him toward the stairs. He counted them again as they passed, 12. Just as intelligence had indicated. Von Harden himself brought up the rear, his pistol drawn, his face alight with the anticipation of the hunt. They climbed to the second floor first, kicking in doors, shouting orders, finding nothing but frightened families who cowered in their nightclothes and swore they knew nothing about hidden Jews. The searches were thorough but routine. These men had done this before many times, but they were searching in a building that had been prepared for them. As the assault team reached the third floor, Jakob rose from his bench and began to climb the stairs behind them. His movements were silent now, the trembling gone, every step placed with the precision of a master stalker. In his right hand, concealed within his coat, the hidden knife waited. The first kill was almost insultingly easy. A single soldier had been left to guard the stairwell while his companions searched the apartments. He was young, bored, convinced that no real danger could exist in a building full of terrified Poles. He never saw the old man approaching from below until the knife slid between his ribs and found his heart. Jakob lowered the body silently to the floor, then moved upward. The second target was a corporal searching a bathroom on the third floor. He died with Jakob's hand over his mouth, the knife moving with surgical precision to sever the carotid artery. Blood flowed like spilled ink in the darkness. From above came the sound of doors splintering, orders being shouted, families being terrorized. Von Harden's voice carried clearly as he directed his men through their systematic violation of human dignity. But with each passing minute, his force was growing smaller. The third and fourth kills came together. Two soldiers who had isolated themselves to search a storage closet. They discovered that the trembling old watchmaker could move like flowing shadow when he chose to, could strike twice in the space of a heartbeat, could kill with the efficiency of a machine designed for no other purpose. By now, Von Harden was beginning to notice that his men weren't reporting in as expected. His voice took on a sharper edge as he called for status reports that didn't come. "Weber, Schmidt, report!" Silence answered him. Jakob had reached the fourth floor now, where the remaining Germans were conducting their search with growing nervousness. They had expected terrified civilians and hidden Jews, not this creeping sense that they were being hunted. The fifth and sixth soldiers died in quick succession, one from a garrote that appeared around his neck like a whisper, the other from poison that had been applied to a door handle he couldn't resist touching. The Jesuits' tools were as varied as they were effective. "Something's wrong," one of the surviving Germans whispered to his companion. "Half our unit has gone silent." "Probably just radio problems," the other replied, but his voice lacked conviction. They were wrong on both counts. It wasn't radio problems, and it wasn't random violence. It was artistry, the precise application of death by a master craftsman who had never forgotten his trade. Von Harden's voice echoed through the building now, no longer confident, but edged with growing panic. "All units, converge on the main stairwell. Something is happening here. But by then it was too late. The trap had closed around them with the inexorable precision of clockwork. The seventh soldier died as he descended the stairs, a knife appearing in his back with such speed that he never had time to cry out. The eighth stumbled over the body of the first, and in that moment of confusion, the old watchmaker materialized from the shadows like death itself. Only four remained now, including von Harden himself. They had clustered together in the second-floor hallway, backs to the walls, weapons drawn, eyes darting at every shadow. "Who's there?" von Harden shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "Show yourself!" Jakob stepped into the dim circle of light cast by the hallway's single bulb. He moved slowly, appearing once again to be nothing more than a frail old man, hands trembling, eyes wide with apparent fear. "Please," he said in Polish, "don't hurt me. I am just the watchmaker. I live here. I fix clocks." Von Harden's relief was visible, his arrogance reasserting itself as he saw what appeared to be a harmless witness. "You, old man, where are my soldiers? What happened to them?" Jakob's performance was perfect. The cowering pose, the shaking voice, the confused expression of a man who had seen too much violence for one night. "Soldiers," he repeated in broken German, his accent thick and peasant crude. I I see soldiers go upstairs. I hear noises, terrible noises. I think maybe partisans, maybe resistance fighters." "Resistance fighters," von Harden snarled. "Where are they? How many?" "I don't know," Jakob wailed, backing against the wall. "I am just old man. I fix watches. I know nothing about fighters." But even as he spoke, his eyes were cataloging distances, calculating angles, preparing for the moment when the performance would end and the real work would begin. Von Harden stepped closer, his pistol trained on the old man's chest. "You're lying. No partisans could have done this. My men were professionals, trained soldiers. It would take an army to—" "Not an army," Jakob said quietly, and something in his voice made von Harden freeze. "Just a ghost." The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The trembling stopped, the stooped posture straightened, and the confused expression vanished entirely. What remained was something von Harden had never seen before. A predator in human form, decades of killing refined into its purest essence. "You," Jakob continued, switching to perfect, aristocratic German, "made the mistake of threatening my granddaughter. In the cafe today, when you spoke of your plans, you thought you were talking to a deaf old fool who couldn't understand your superior language." Von Harden's face went white as understanding crashed over him like ice water. You speak German." "Fluently. I also speak French, Italian, Russian, and Hungarian. I read Greek and Latin. In another life, I held 3 university degrees and spoke at diplomatic functions across Europe." Jakob took a step forward, and von Harden actually retreated. "But most relevantly, I once held the rank of colonel in the intelligence service of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They called me the Jesuit." Recognition dawned in von Harden's eyes, fear, pure and primal. Every intelligence officer in Central Europe knew that name, knew the stories that had grown into legend over the years. "That's impossible," von Harden whispered. "The Jesuit disappeared 20 years ago. He's dead or too old to—" "I am 70 years old," Jakob agreed conversationally. "My hands shake sometimes from arthritis. My back aches when it rains. But muscle memory is a remarkable thing, Sturmbannführer. Once you learn to kill efficiently, the knowledge never really leaves you." The remaining 3 German soldiers raised their weapons, but their hands were shaking now. They had signed up to terrorize helpless civilians, not to face a legendary assassin in a darkened hallway. "Shoot him!" von Harden screamed, but Jakob was already moving. What happened next lasted perhaps 10 seconds, though to the participants it felt like hours. The old watchmaker flowed between the Germans like smoke, the hidden knife appearing in his hand as if by magic. The first soldier fired once, wildly, before the blade found the space between his ribs. The second managed to work his weapon's bolt before Jakob's free hand found his throat. The third actually got off a shot that grazed his old man's shoulder before discovering that a 70-year-old could still move like water when properly motivated. When the violence ended, only von Harden remained alive, backed against the wall, his pistol trembling in his grip as he stared at the carnage surrounding him. "8 of my men," he whispered. 8 trained soldiers. How is this possible? Jakob wiped the blade of his knife clean with methodical care before returning it to its concealment. Blood seeped from the graze on his shoulder, but he ignored it with the indifference of a man who had suffered worse wounds and survived. You made several tactical errors, he said with the patience of a teacher correcting a slow student. First, you underestimated your enemy. Second, you failed to maintain proper unit cohesion in unfamiliar territory. Third, you allowed arrogance to override basic security protocols. And finally, most critically, you threatened children under my protection. Von Harden's finger tightened on his trigger, but his hand was shaking so badly he couldn't aim properly. Stay back! I'll kill you! No, Jakob said with absolute certainty. You won't. He began to walk forward, slowly, steadily, his eyes never leaving von Harden's face. The German fired twice, both shots going wide in his panic. A third shot clicked on an empty chamber. You see, Jakob continued conversationally as he approached, I counted your ammunition expenditure throughout the evening. Standard Luger P08, 8-round magazine, 1 round chambered. Your men fired a total of 6 shots during the engagement. You just fired 3 more. Mathematics was always one of my stronger subjects. Von Harden threw the empty pistol at him and tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Jakob caught him easily, one weathered hand closing around the younger man's throat with surprising strength. Please, Von Harden gasped. I have a family, children. So did the people you terrorized, Jakob replied quietly. So do the families whose children you steal for your programs. So did I, once upon a time. The knife found its mark with the precision of a surgeon and the finality of an executioner. Von Harden's eyes widened in shock, then went dark as the light faded from them forever. Jakob lowered the body to the floor with something approaching gentleness. Even monsters he had learned long ago deserved dignity in death. The building fell silent, except for the distant ticking of clocks from his shop below. Somewhere in the walls, Sarah remained hidden, alive and safe. 3 floors up, Eliza waited with Mrs. Kowalski, both women praying for his return. The old watchmaker looked around at the carnage he had created. 12 bodies scattered through the building like broken clockwork, their violence finally stilled. There was no satisfaction in it, no joy, just the quiet completion of necessary work. He began the cleanup with the same methodical precision he brought to repairing timepieces. Bodies were positioned to suggest a firefight with unseen partisans. Weapons were redistributed to create the appearance of a failed assault. Blood was cleaned from walls and floors. Evidence was planted to point investigations in wrong directions. By dawn, when the first German search teams arrived to investigate the missing unit, they would find only what Jakob wanted them to find, the aftermath of a partisan attack, expertly planned and executed by forces that had vanished into the Warsaw Underground. The old watchmaker, meanwhile, would be exactly where he was supposed to be, in his shop, bent over his workbench, hands trembling slightly as he repaired the delicate mechanisms that measured the passage of time. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Jakob Novak, Zegermistress, as if nothing had changed, as if the night had brought nothing more than dreams in the ordinary passage of hours. Jakob sat at his workbench, a magnifying glass held in one slightly trembling hand as he examined the escapement of a lady's wristwatch. To any observer, he appeared to be exactly what he had always seemed, a frail old man pursuing his quiet craft, perhaps a little more tired than usual, maybe nursing a slight cold that made his shoulder ache. The bell above his door chimed, and Oberscharführer Müller entered with the swagger of a man accustomed to being feared. He was von Harden's replacement, younger and cruder, the kind of brute who compensated for lack of intelligence with enthusiasm for violence. You, Muller barked in broken Polish. Old man, you live in building on Konopaka Street? Jakob looked up slowly, blinking in apparent confusion. Yes, sir, I am watchmaker. I live upstairs from my shop. You hear shooting last night? See partisans? Shooting? Jakob's voice carried exactly the right note of elderly bewilderment. Yes, I think I heard noises. Very frightening. I hid under my bed like in the last war. Are we safe now, sir? Muller studied him with the limited perception of a man who saw only what he expected to see. An old Pole, clearly terrified, obviously harmless. He had conducted dozens of interviews like this, and they all followed the same pattern. Fear, confusion, and the desperate eagerness to please that marked the conquered. Sturmbannführer von Harden and his unit were killed by terrorists, Muller announced, watching for any flicker of reaction. Professional partisans. Very dangerous men who kill German soldiers. Jakob's hands stilled on his work, his face creasing with what appeared to be genuine shock. Killed? Oh, mein God. I mean, dear God, the young officer with the pale eyes? He was here just yesterday, asking about my watches. You spoke with him? Briefly, sir. He admired my workmanship. Such a polite young man. I cannot believe. Jakob's voice trailed off, his performance flawless. Who would do such a terrible thing? Muller's suspicion began to ease. The old man was clearly shaken by the news, displaying exactly the kind of fearful cooperation the Germans had come to expect from the Polish population. Dangerous criminals, Muller said importantly, but we will find them. We always find them. After the German left, Jakob continued his work in peaceful silence. Through his window, he could see the ordinary life of Warsaw continuing, people hurrying to work, children playing in doorways when they thought no one was watching, the endless, small acts of survival that marked existence under occupation. At precisely noon, Eliza appeared at his door, her young face carefully composed but her eyes bright with questions she couldn't ask in public. Behind her, Mrs. Kowalski nodded respectfully and continued on her way, giving no sign that she had spent the night harboring potential evidence of resistance activity. Uncle, Eliza whispered as she kissed his cheek, are you well? You look tired. Just old bones complaining about the weather, he replied gently. How was your night at Mrs. Kowalski's? I hope you weren't too frightened by the disturbances. They spoke in careful code, the language of people who had learned that walls might have ears, and that survival often depended on saying nothing important aloud. But in the way she squeezed his hand, in the relief that flooded her eyes, Jakob could read her understanding. The threat was over. They were safe. That afternoon brought a steady stream of customers, mostly German officers and officials who needed their timepieces maintained. Jakob served them all with the same deferential politeness, his hands trembling appropriately as he accepted their watches and promised careful attention to their needs. None of them noticed that the tremor in his hands was purely theatrical now, or that behind his vacant expression lay the satisfied mind of a craftsman who had completed a particularly complex piece of work. The gears had meshed perfectly. Each element of his plan had functioned exactly as designed, and the dangerous clockwork that had threatened his family had been permanently stopped. As evening fell and the last customer departed, Jakob closed his shop and climbed the narrow stairs to his apartment. Sarah emerged from her hiding place like a ghost returning to the world of the living, her pale face streaked with tears of relief. Is it over? She whispered. It is over, Jakob confirmed, gathering both girls into his arms. For a moment, they stood together in the lamplight, three survivors who had faced the darkness and emerged intact. Later that night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Jakob returned to his hidden cache and carefully cleaned his tools. The knife was restored to its oiled wrapping, the radio components were checked and stored, the false documents were returned to their concealment. The ghost of Vienna settled back into its long sleep, patient and dormant, waiting for the next time it might be needed. But before he closed the hidden panel, Jakob allowed himself one small indulgence. From a locked box in the back of the cache, he withdrew a photograph, faded and creased, showing a younger version of himself in the uniform of the Austro-Hungarian intelligence service. Beside him stood a beautiful woman with dark hair and fierce eyes, and at their feet played a small boy who would grow up to be Eliza's father. They were all gone now, claimed by the First War and the chaos that followed. Only the old watchmaker remained, keeper of their memory, protector of their legacy. I kept them safe, Anna, he whispered to the photograph, just as I promised. He returned the picture to its box and sealed the cache. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new repairs, new challenges. The occupation would continue, the war would rage on, and somewhere in the city other children would need protecting from other monsters. But tonight in a small apartment above a watchmaker's shop, two young girls slept peacefully, their dreams untroubled by nightmares. And in the chair beside their bed, an old man kept vigil with the patient dedication of someone who understood that the most important victories were often the quietest ones. The clocks in his shop below ticked steadily through the night, measuring time with the precision that only comes from perfect understanding of how small, careful movements can create something greater than their sum. And in that gentle symphony of clockwork, there was a kind of peace, the peace that comes from knowing that some things endure, that some lights cannot be extinguished, and that even in the darkest times, there are those who stand watch in the shadows. Asterisk, 3 months later. The new Gestapo commander for the Warsaw district was a different breed entirely. Older, more experienced, infinitely more cautious. Oberfuhrer Heinrich Kessler had survived the Eastern Front and knew the difference between partisan activity and something far more dangerous. He sat in his office studying the files that had accumulated on his desk, his weathered face creased with concentration. The reports told a story that disturbed him more than any straightforward military engagement ever could. Von Harden's unit found dead to the last man. The investigation had concluded it was a partisan attack, but the forensics troubled Kessler. Too precise, too professional, too reminiscent of the intelligence wars he remembered from the previous conflict. "Bring me everything we have on resistance activity in the Praga district," he ordered his aide. But the files yielded nothing useful. A few arrests here and there, some propaganda leaflets, the usual acts of small defiance that marked any occupied territory. Nothing that suggested the presence of a professional intelligence operative. Still, Kessler's instincts nagged at him. He had spent too many years hunting real ghosts to dismiss the possibility that one might be walking the streets of Warsaw. 3 blocks away in a small shop where clocks ticked away the hours with mechanical precision, an old man bent over his workbench and smiled. Not the vacant smile of senility, but the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who had created something beautiful and enduring. On his wall, the photograph of his father remained in its place of honor. Robert Kingston, Vietnam veteran, builder of sanctuaries, and beside it now hung a small, faded picture of a young soldier in the uniform of the Polish resistance, one of many brave souls who had never lived to see the freedom they died fighting for. The watchmaker's hands moved with steady precision as he repaired a delicate chronometer, each adjustment calculated to restore perfect time. Around him, the symphony of ticking clocks marked the passage of seconds, minutes, hours, the inexorable flow of time that would eventually wash away all empires, all tyrants, all those who believed their power could last forever. In the back room, 2 young women studied by lamplight, Eliza working on her mathematics, Sarah carefully copying passages from banned books that spoke of hope and human dignity. They were alive, they were safe, and they were learning that even in the darkest times, knowledge was a light that could not be extinguished. And somewhere in the city, in offices and barracks and command posts, German officers spoke in whispers of the ghost that haunted Warsaw, the phantom who struck without warning, the shadow that turned hunters into prey. They posted extra guards and changed their routines, but they could not shake the feeling that somewhere, always, they were being watched. They were right to be afraid. Because in a small shop where broken things were made whole again, an old man kept careful time, his patient hands measuring out justice one precise tick at a time. The Jesuit slept, but he did not dream, and when the darkness called again, he would be ready. After all, some skills are never forgotten, and some watches never stop ticking.